what really happens when we die? I mean, is there something about us that survives, something eternal? And, what is the ultimate nature of reality itself? These are just huge questions, right?
Absolutely huge. And humans have been grappling with them forever. Some of the most profound attempts to answer them come from these ancient Indian texts, the Upanishads.
Right, the Upanishads. And today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most, famous and really beautiful ones, the Katha Upanishad.
Exactly. And it does something fascinating. It wraps this massive philosophical quest inside a story. It's about this encounter between a young seeker, Nachiketas, who's incredibly determined,
Okay.
and Yama, who is literally the Lord of Death. Nachiketas basically corners death and asks for the ultimate knowledge, what lies beyond it all.
That's quite the setup. So our mission here, using the sources we've got, different translations, commentaries, perspectives, is to really unpack Yama's answers.
Yeah, we want to get to the core of what the Katha Upanishad reveals about, well, our true self, why it seems so hard for us to grasp it, and the path it lays out, which, spoiler alert, isn't exactly easy.
Okay, let's get into it. Where does the Upanishad start? What's the basic problem it identifies?
Well, it points to something pretty fundamental about, us, how we experience the world. It observes that our sense organs, eyes, ears, everything, they're naturally designed to look outwards.
Right. We're kind of wired to focus on the external world.
Precisely. That's our default setting, this sort of ingrained tendency, this instinctive extroversion. It even has a name, Bahir Mukhatvam. Our senses perceive external objects, and we naturally look for happiness, for satisfaction out there.
But the Katha Upanishad seems pretty skeptical about that approach. It calls those external things perishable, fleeting.
Yes, exactly. Anatma, not the true self. And constantly chasing them, defining ourselves by, what we own or achieve externally. The text suggests that's the way of the unintelligent, or maybe better put, those who are still immature in their thinking, like children reaching for shiny objects.
And there's this idea of Maya, illusion, keeping us caught up in all that.
Right. The sources mention Maya as this sort of veil, or maybe a force, that keeps us completely absorbed in external duties, worldly stuff. And the thing is, you can achieve a lot out there,
Sure.
but it doesn't necessarily lead to that inner sense of wholeness, of completeness, that purnatvam, that deep down we might actually be seeking.
And this outward focus is getting tangled up in temporary things. That's linked to the cycle of death and rebirth. I'm sorry.
Directly linked. The text is quite clear. Those focused purely on external pleasure and pursuits, they fall prey to this cycle. They get caught in its momentum.
So it's not a smooth ride.
Not at all. Worldly existence, from this view, isn't linear progress. It's often described as a kind of constant zigzag back and forth, up and down, driven by the consequences of our past actions, our karma. We're constantly reacting.
Okay, so if the problem is this default outward focus getting stuck in the temporary, what's the alternative? How do we get out of that zigzag?
The alternative, the Upanishad says, is a conscious choice, turning inward. While most people are swept along by that outward current, the text highlights that there are these few wise men there, the wise or steadfast ones who desire something permanent, immortality. And they deliberately redirect their attention inward.
Towards self-knowledge,
Yeah.
self-realization.
Exactly. That becomes the focus.
And in Nachiketas, the young seeker, he's the prime example of this, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because Yama, death, offers him everything.
Everything imaginable in the external world. Long life, wealth, power, pleasure, you name it. And Nachiketas just says no. Flat out refuses.
That's incredible resolve.
It really is. He is completely fixed on wanting knowledge, vidya. The text contrasts this sharply with avidya, ignorance, which is being caught up in the temporary. His refusal is a powerful statement about his priorities.
And his big question to death, the third boon he asks for, it gets right to the core, doesn't it? He's not asking about heaven or rewards.
No, nothing like that. He asks Yama to teach him about that, which is beyond virtue and vice, beyond cause and effect, beyond even past and future.
Wow. So something totally outside our normal way of understanding things.
Yeah.
Beyond time.
Exactly. He's asking for knowledge of the absolute, something not limited by empirical experience or the flow of time.
And Yama's answer, the central teaching, is summed up in that phrase, etad vaitat.
Etad vaitat, yes. This indeed is that. It's incredibly profound. It's not saying the ultimate reality is somewhere else, far away. It's pointing right here. It is your essential nature.
This is that.
Okay.
Hey, that's a lot to unpack. So how does the Upanishad actually describe this self, this Atman or Brahman?
Well, it uses many different angles because it's trying to point to something that ultimately words can't fully capture. First off, it's the fundamental principle of consciousness itself. Chaitanyam.
Consciousness.
Yes, everything you experience, sights, sounds, thoughts, feelings, is known, is objectified because of this underlying consciousness. It's the ultimate subject, the experiencer, and it's completely distinct from all the objects it experiences.
So it's like the witness.
Exactly, the term used,
Yeah.
sakshi, the witness. It's that awareness which is present whether you're awake, dreaming, or in deep, dreamless sleep. But, and this is crucial, it's different from all three states. The states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep happen within it, but the witness itself isn't limited by them, or by the space and time that define those states.
So is it located somewhere specific? Like people talk about consciousness being in the brain.
The text uses terms like mahat, meaning great or vast, and vibhum, meaning infinitely vast, all-pervading. While it's often poetically described as being lodged in the heart,
Uh-huh.
it's not confined to the physical heart or the brain. It's understood as limitless. Consciousness is still there even when there are no thoughts or objects, like in deep sleep. It pervades everything.
That idea of something infinite being in the heart is still hard to wrap my head around.
It is. It's a paradox for our finite minds. Another way the Upanishad approaches it is by calling the self the intelligence behind all the sense organs. It uses this idea of discriminating the seer from the seen, drak drisha viveka.
Seer and seen, okay?
Right, think about it. Your body, your senses, even your thoughts and emotions, you are aware of them. They are seen or witnessed.
Ah, I see. So they can't be the ultimate seer.
Exactly. The ultimate seer, the self, is that through which you know everything else. It's the knowing principle itself.
So it's not what I see, but the seeing itself, or that which enables seeing.
Precisely. And because it's so fundamentally different from anything we can perceive with senses or grasp with the mind, the text often has to resort to telling us what it isn't.
Negative descriptions.
Yes, like in that famous verse echoed from the Mandukya Upanishad. It's described as without sound, without touch, without form, without decay, without taste, without smell. It has no beginning, no end.
Defined by absence.
In a way, it's beyond empirical qualities, incomprehensible to the intellect alone, uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable by ordinary means. Yet it's also described positively, like in the Mandukya, as peaceful, auspicious, non-dual, the ultimate reality.
And this is what's somehow in the heart of every creature. Subtler than the subtle, greater than the great. Both tiny and infinite.
Exactly that paradox, intimately present yet boundless. The sources also use that powerful metaphor of the Ashwatha tree, the world tree.
Oh, right. The upside-down tree.
That's the one. Its branches, representing the changing phenomenal world, grow downwards. They're unsteady, perishable. But its root is upwards, fixed in Brahman, this pure, luminous, unchanging reality. All the worlds, all of creation, are said to be fixed on or dependent on this eternal root.
So the changing world we experience springs from this unchanging source.
That's the idea. And importantly, the text stresses the unity. The self within the individual, the vyashti, is fundamentally the same as the universal reality, the samashti. The consciousness in you isn't just like the cosmic consciousness, it is it.
Wow. And this Brahman, this self, isn't just passive consciousness. It's also the source of creation itself.
It is. The sources describe Brahman as being both the material cause, the upadana karnam, the very substance of the universe,
Okay.
and the intelligent cause, the nimitta karnam, the conscious power that designs, creates, and sustains it all. It's sometimes referred to as prana in this context, meaning the ultimate life force, the life of life, pranasha prana. It's the power that upholds cosmic order.
Like a cosmic law.
Sort of, but also a conscious power. The text describes it with awe, like an uplifted thunderbolt, mahat bayam vajram udayatam. It signifies immense power that commands respect, ensuring order. Knowing this Brahman is what grants immortality.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the picture. In our everyday lives, we feel separate, right? I'm an individual, a jiva, and maybe I think of God, Ishvara, or the world, Jagat, as separate from me.
That's our normal empirical experience, the Vyavaharika plane, as the commentaries call it. We function with a sense of duality, subject-object, me-world, me-God.
But the ultimate truth, the paramartika reality, is non-dual.
That's the core insight, absolutely. In ultimate reality, there's only one non-dual consciousness, Abheda Chaitanyam. The sources use analogies to help us grasp this. Think of space, it seems, divided by pots and rooms, but it's one indivisible space.
Oh.
Or like the one sun reflecting in countless pots of water, the reflections look different, numerous, but the source is one. Or how the sun's light illuminates everything, pure and impure, but remains untainted itself.
So the one self appears as all these diverse forms, but isn't actually divided or affected by them.
Exactly. It takes on the attributes of the body and mind it's associated with in the empirical realm, but in its true nature, it remains untouched, pure, limitless consciousness.
So that means my deepest, truest self is that universal, non-dual Brahman.
That's the staggering implication, yes.
Okay. But if that's true, if this is already our nature, why don't we feel it? Why don't we know it? And crucially, how do we get there? How did Yama tell Nachiketas to realize this?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the Upanishad is very direct here. This knowledge, this realization, it's not something you can get just by studying books or through sharp logical arguments alone.
So reading scriptures isn't enough. Thinking really hard isn't enough.
Not in itself. The text says it's more than logical reasoning. You can't just intellectually figure it out and be done. And you certainly can't, physically go somewhere to find it.
You can't travel to the self.
No, the Purusha, the self, isn't a destination. It's not reached by effort in the way we normally think of effort, like building something or journeying somewhere. It's not a future event you achieve. It's described more like an illumination, a recognition of an eternal fact that's already true right now.
Like waking up from a dream.
That's a great analogy used in the commentaries. If you dream you're, say, a butterfly,
Okay.
and you want to be human again, what do you do as the butterfly? You don't flap your wings differently or try to build a house. You just wake up.
Your consciousness shifts.
Exactly. The reality was always there. You just weren't attuned to it. Realizing the self is like that, a fundamental shift in consciousness, recognizing what you already are.
That sounds simple, but probably isn't easy at all.
Far from easy. The path is explicitly called subtle and difficult. That famous line compares it to walking on the sharp edge of a razor, korasya dara nishiduratya.
Wow, a razor's edge. That sounds treacherous.
It implies it requires incredible balance, focus, and is easy to fall off. It's also compared to trying to follow the track of birds in the sky or fish in water, subtle, hard to perceive, demanding great skill.
Okay, so what makes it so incredibly hard then? What's needed?
The core challenge is deep inner transformation. The text really hammers this home. You need freedom from desires, from longings, not just suppressing them temporarily, but their complete disappearance from the heart.
All desires.
All binding desires, yes. The senses and the mind need to be brought to a state of stillness, of rest. Even the intellect, the discriminating faculty, eventually becomes quiet. This state of profound inner quietude is called the highest state.
And realization happens then.
It arises through that stillness, through deep concentration, dhyana, and locating the self within your own inner being in the cave of the heart.
And what are the main roadblocks? The things that stop us?
The sources talk about them as being fundamentally one obstacle appearing in three ways: ignorance, avidya, desire, kama, and action, karma. They're intertwined, like three strands of a rope binding us, sometimes called the tripura or the granthis, the knots in the heart.
Ignorance, desire, action.
Yes, and a key aspect of the ignorance, the avidya, is mistaking the non-self for the self. Identifying completely with the body, the mind, the personality, this limited, changing package. This fundamental error fuels desire, which leads to action, which creates karmic consequences, reinforcing the cycle.
So controlling the mind and senses is absolutely crucial then, to break that cycle.
Absolutely central. Remember that outward pull, bahir mukhatvam? It's the default. The senses constantly rush towards objects. The Upanishad even warns against hypocrisy.
What do you?
Like physically withdrawing from sense objects, but letting your mind constantly fantasize about them or dwell on them. The text suggests your mental state, what you think and desire, is actually more significant than just physical avoidance.
Ah, okay. So yoga here is more than just physical.
Much more. In this context, yoga is primarily this deep mental, psychological discipline. The text defines yoga itself as stiram intyatran, the steady holding back, the firm control of the senses and mind.
Steady control. And it needs vigilance.
Constant vigilance, yes.
Yeah.
Because the mind tends to wander. The sources mention specific practices that help cultivate this inner stability. There's sravanam, diligently listening to the teachings from a qualified source.
Listening. Okay.
Then there's often mention of upasana, which involves practices to focus the mind, maybe meditation on a symbol or idea, sometimes seen as preparing the mind before the deep inquiry. And crucially, nididhasanam. This is deep contemplation, dwelling on the truth heard, internalizing it, and using it to actively remove your habitual, mistaken notions about who you are. This comes after listening.
Listening, focusing, contemplating.
Yes. And underlying all this, the sources stress the importance of srana, a kind of deep faith or conviction. Not blind faith, but a working trust in the teaching and the possibility of realizing Brahman. It's considered a vital preparatory quality.
It sounds like a complete re-engineering of your inner world.
That's a good way to put it. The goal is systematically bringing the senses under the mind's control, and then bringing the mind under the control of the discriminating intellect, and finally letting that intellect dissolve into the self.
And the result of mastering this?
Immortality, right here and now. The text says, the person who lives free from the driving force of worldly desires becomes immortal in this life. The chariot parable makes this clear too.
Right.
If the intellect, the charioteer, isn't sharp and discriminating, and the mind, the reins, is uncontrolled, letting the senses, horses, run wild, then the soul, the owner of the chariot, doesn't reach the destination, the state of Vishnu or Brahman. It stays stuck in samsara, the cycle of becoming.
But the person who does have that discrimination?
That person understands true, unchanging immortality isn't found out there in the world of temporary things. So they stop chasing, stop praying for worldly gains. They know where the real value lies.
And they achieve unity.
Yes. The sage who knows this unity is compared to pure water poured into pure water. They become one with the source. They see the self in all and all in the self. Peace isn't sought. It becomes their very nature. It's about recognizing yourself as Atma, the essence of all creation.
And that key technique Yama mentions, separating the self, like a stalk of grass.
Exactly. That's a very specific, powerful image. He says you must separate the Purusha, the self, from your own body, Dharya, with steadfastness, unerringly, just as you'd carefully draw the inner stalk out from its sheath of munja grass.
Carefully discerning the consciousness from the physical and mental layers it seems mixed with.
Precisely. It requires subtle, careful discrimination. And that separated essence, Yama says, that is to be known as the pure, the immortal.
So if someone manages this incredibly difficult path, this inner separation, what's the payoff? What's the final result?
The ultimate result is total freedom, liberation, moksha. Specifically, freedom from grief, from sorrow, yukkha. By realizing the subtle self, the text says, the wise person rejoices. They gain that which is the real source of delight, not fleeting pleasure, but abiding bliss.
Freedom from grief.
Yeah.
How does that work? Is it just suppression?
No, not suppression. Grief fundamentally comes from attachment, from identification with things that are limited and perishable to the body, relationships, possessions, identity. When you realize your true nature is the unlimited, unchanging, all-pervading self,
Right.
what is there to grieve? What can truly be lost from that? You realize your core being is indestructible, whole, and complete. The root of sorrow is cut.
And this is the freedom from the jaws of death that Nachiketas was asking for.
Exactly that. Knowing the self is immortality because it frees you from the whole cycle driven by ignorance, desire, and action, which is what death in this context really represents. The text says the mansion of Brahman, this ultimate reality, is wide open to the one who becomes fit, who has done the inner work.
And the bliss. You mentioned bliss. Is it like, feeling really, really happy all the time?
It's described as Brahma Ananda, the bliss of Brahman. And the sources are careful to distinguish it from Vishaya Ananda, the pleasure we get from sense objects contacting the mind.
Okay, what's the difference?
Vishaya Ananda's sense pleasure is always relative, temporary, dependent on external things, and often has a reaction or consequence. Brahma Ananda is described as supreme, absolute, limitless, unspeakable. It's not an object of experience you feel, it's the very nature of the self. It's inherent, always present, beyond time and space.
So it's not an emotion, but the ground of being itself.
That's a good way to think about it, yes. And realizing this totally transforms your relationship with the world.
How so? Do you become detached and withdrawn?
Not necessarily alienated. The sources suggest the realized person isn't a stranger to the world, nor is the world a stranger to them. Seeing the self in all, the universe can, in a sense, become part of their own expanded nature. They lack nothing fundamental.
And they gain powers.
Yeah.
I think I saw something about Lakshmi and Saraswati.
Yes. Symbolically, it's said that abundance, Lakshmi, and wisdom, Saraswati, are naturally available to such a yogi. It signifies mastery over inner and outer forces, born from that deep connection to the source. They lack nothing because they are one with everything.
And this all comes back to Brahman being the ultimate source, the light behind everything.
Exactly. The Upanishad uses that beautiful concluding image. As he shines, so does everything else shine after him. By his light, all this is illumined.
The sun, moon, stars.
Fire, lightning, everything derives its light, its power, its very existence from that one self-effulgent source, Brahman. Knowing that eternal, unchanging, the consciousness behind all manifestation, that is what frees you ultimately from the grasp of death and limitation.
Wow. Okay. So we've really traced Nachiketa's journey here, from that basic human condition of looking outward, getting caught, through his incredible determination to turn inward, to Yama's revelation of this vast non-dual self, and finally this very challenging path to actually realizing that truth.
Yes. And that core message, Yama's ultimate teaching, Etadvaitat, just resonates throughout. This ultimate reality, the source of freedom and bliss. It isn't some far-off goal you have to strive for externally or reach only after you die.
Right.
It's revealed by turning your attention inward, by discriminating, by understanding your own deepest nature as that consciousness, distinct from the changing body, the changing mind, the changing world.
And that really leaves you, the listener, with something profound to consider. If this ultimate reality, Brahman, is truly lodged in the heart of every creature, as the Upanishad says, and the path involves this careful inner discernment, separating that awareness from everything else, like pulling that stalk from the grass, what could that possibly mean for your day-to-day experience of yourself? How might you even begin to look not just outwards for satisfaction, but for that eternal presence the Katha Upanishad insists is already right here within?